Welcome at the Growcast, the podcast of BlueCity and BlueCity Lab, in which we talk with 8 Rotterdam-based pioneering biodesigners, our so-called pioneers, about how a future will look like if we design with nature as our guideline. We started this podcast to celebrate the opening of BlueCity Lab, a biocircular playground for pioneers located in the heart of Blue City.
We invited 4 frontrunners whose work will make us rethink everything we think we know, and 4 aspiring biodesigners who want to challenge the status quo. My name is Barbara Vos.
And I'm Emma van der Leest.
In this podcast, we want to welcome Nico Bouchard, a biohacker originally from the States, and he volunteered in one of America's first community biolabs. Last year, he moved to Rotterdam and he studies at the Willem de Kooning Academy and uses BlueCity Lab to test his concepts. So, welcome, Nico.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
What's a biohacker?
Ooh. Well, biohacker has like a weird kind of association to it, right? Because a lot of people think that we're like the cyber hackers from the 90s, which isn't really a clear illustration. And a lot of like the media projections don't really show it clearly either with like the new Netflix series that came out. A lot of what biohackers are is people who came from university or institutional settings and they had their projects at school, but they're workaholics, and so they built labs at home, and they just kind of carried their experiments in their off hours as well. But what's kind of come from that is there's this huge active community now of people who have scientific backgrounds, like proper hardcore academic credentialing, and then coming into these community spaces where they share knowledge and expertise, and they lend their hands to people from diverse backgrounds to kind of get introduced into the sciences, teach people what are the basic things you need to understand the scientific aspect of your experimental design. And it's kind of become an enabling creative zone for tremendous amounts of cross-pollination across scientific disciplines, but also the arts.
How did this crisis affect you?
Yeah, I mean, the first few weeks were definitely rough, not knowing what was going on. But I feel I was really fortunate, actually, because right before COVID happened, I got this huge wave of inspiration. So I just started on some personal projects. And I actually, after the first few weeks, I like regained so much of my personal focus, and that's translated into some consulting opportunities and some other projects that I'll talk about later. And it was actually quite amazing because to me it was this, it might sound a little California, but I found it was like a tremendous opportunity because for my entire life, it feels like the dialogue with the natural world has been one where we as a species just kind of tell nature what we're doing. And for the first time, like, we heard an echo back that was so loud that the entire planet stopped operations for 3 months. And so that was a really awesome opportunity for reflection for me personally as to how we interact with the natural world, because we're creating all these problems and now we're kind of forced into a dialogue again, which is an exciting opportunity for me.
But you're also studying
still. Yeah.
So I can also imagine that part was a bit different and that you maybe were in lack of certain machines or...
Yeah, totally. I chose over the summer to actually just work full-time at a startup just so I could actually solve some of those problems. Like, we don't have access to the machines like we used to, for sure. I've been able to take that opportunity to kind of buy my own 3D printer, a little laser cutter at home, so I can start prototyping and doing my schoolwork because, yeah, totally. COVID has kind of made it really difficult for students to have access to all of the materials we're used to. So I was really fortunate actually to have the opportunity to just kind of start creating that for myself.
If we go back to the start, how did you find out about biodesign?
Yeah, well, biodesign was, for me, I mean, moving to a new culture, a new country, I was like, okay, I operate in this world of biotechnology and artists and startups, and I was just kind of looking for my loose parameters, and in the Netherlands, Biodesign is the community for people who are interested in biology, but also interested not just in the analytical side, but also the creative side as well. It's like to me, it's like the cultural permutation of what biohacking was, but just applied to Europe because of the cultural lenses here.
Could you name one favorite example of a biodesign project?
Ooh. Yeah, it's. I wouldn't necessarily say it's entirely biodesign because the school then started creating their own monikers around it at the Bartlett School of Architecture. But it and then Lars van Vienen also kind of touches on it in his work.
Lars van Vianen.
Yeah, he touches on
Scape agency.
exactly. He touches on the work as well. And it was out of Richard Beckett's lab. He created these concrete facades that are bioreceptive, and Lars has been doing similar work. And through the podcast, I got to meet him and talk to him, and super cool work. I love that.
And how did you get here at BlueCity Lab? How did you find out about it?
Through my network from the startup community. I mean, years ago, I went through SOSV's Biotech Accelerator program, and so through that, I know quite a bit of the community around the Vach Society. And as soon as I landed, I was like, hey, where should I go and kind of explore? And they're like, oh, check out BlueCity. Yeah.
Because you're in Rotterdam now.
Yeah. Cool. But also in general, they're just kind of like, if you're in the Netherlands, like check out BlueCity, check out the Vach. It's just kind of one of the spots.
Well, that's good to hear. And of course, you get your inspiration from nature. Which aspect of nature inspires you and why? Or if you have multiple.
Yeah, there's two big ones. One, in a healthy ecosystem, there are like more connections even between species than there are neurons in the human brain. So to me, like just the fact that anything a human has thought of, right? We're just like pattern recognition machines after all, and for some reason we have this construct where we don't see that we actually took our patterns that we're applying to technologies from nature. But if we've come up with anything, it's actually probably from nature. And if there's any design problem, you can look at nature and it's been solved, because that's kind of my second point. Like Mother Nature is like the egoless designer, inventor, creator, physicist, mathematician. She just creates and will create every single permutation, iteration thereof, create like hundreds of multiple variations thereof without being asked, without needing any sort of incentive. And if there's a possibility for something to be created with what is available, nature does it.
So can you tell us a little more about what it is that you do exactly?
Yeah, so right now I have a few active projects. One is focused on developing IoT sensor, quote-unquote, satellites.
Sorry,
what
is IoT for the listeners who don't know?
Yeah, Internet of Things. So imagine there are these little boxes that you can scatter around a neighborhood, for instance. And these boxes have sensors in them that will measure, for the time being, air quality. And what I'm collaborating with a few people, programmers and engineers, and we're taking that data and we're creating some sort of creative system to be like, okay, here are the data points, and here's what it means for human health. And then we put that into a bit of a program, and then I have built these analog kinetic sculptures, and they're me kind of researching how you can use kinetic facades to visualize ecosystem health data in a way that, like for people who don't like looking at graphs like me, like I wake up in the morning and I type in ASRE Nederland and I'm like, okay, what are the COVID numbers? I know people aren't like me. They don't like looking at graphs, so it's kind of an exploration in how to communicate those really complex data points.
The facades and the data you have right now about...
Yeah.
How do you visualize that, not in a graph? Do you also work on a physical object? So, for example, for the neighborhood to see what is happening?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's currently a prototype. I mean, it's still in its motor and broken apart pieces form, but it's a tower that's kind of like 6 layers high, and each of the layers is controlled by a rotating motor. And what happens is, like, there's this solid form that you see, and as the air quality gets worse, the slices are like delayed or offset. So as it's rotating back and forth, there's a delay between the motor, and the visual depiction of the sculpture is distorted. So I'm calling it glitch because it's like visualizing a glitch in the ecosystem. If the conditions are bad, you get this glitchy image. If they're good, you can see what the image is.
And that's a scale model, or do you have it in your house, for example?
I have one. I'm building one in my house. It's about 50 centimeters tall.
Okay.
I've been working on an antiviral face mask project with one of my collaborators from the startup. Last week, we just started discussions with TNO to start being able to test the virucidal claim. So throughout also the summer, I did a lot of testing, a lot of prototyping with masks to test essentially the solution that we concocted that has indications that we found that it kills SARS-1. And so we developed a very simple biodegradable mask concept, tested out various concentrations, like wore bunches of them, kind of saw how comfortable it was. Would this be safe for the average person? If somebody who's not kind of interested in science be comfortable with something like this? And now we're taking it to the next stage to get the third-party validation that yes, this kills viruses, not coronavirus, because that test costs €100,000. But you can do it with less exotic or dangerous viruses. And so we're now in the process of finding partners, and hopefully TNO can help us with that.
So you're inspired by nature, but you work with technology. How do you combine these two worlds?
Well, nature is technology. And I think like in a lot of ways, like we don't really look at it that way. But like, I mean, if you look at a healthy rainforest, there's probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of potential like biomolecules or some sort of pharmaceutical like that's there. Like everything that we use as humans comes actually from the natural world, like our drugs, our medicines, our food. The products that we use are, mainly the derivative of broken down dinosaur bones. And so to me, there isn't really a differentiation between technology and nature. It's just kind of confronting the fact that technology is nature and to look at the tools she provides to be able to solve the problems that we've kind of caused for ourselves.
So, Nico, you are originally from the States, moved here to the Netherlands from the Bay Area. Could you tell us a bit more about the focus and link between the differences in the US and the Netherlands on a topic of biodesign? Do you see, or here in Europe, do you see a big difference? How do you look at it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's just, first and foremost, there's like the cultural difference, right? And
you can be honest.
Yeah, I mean, in the States, it's the wild, wild west, right? I mean, like, biohacking isn't regulated, like, biology isn't regulated in the States like it is here. I had a lab in my room. I could make GMOs in my room, no problem. The regulations come in at the commercialization side of things. So if I want to have a product, I want to sell it, then a GMO would be regulated as a drug or a GMO or something like that. And that's where those regulations would come into play. So on that level, like, in the States, we're enabled to just play around with the technologies. It's just when we want to do something and monetize it in the States that we need to start being careful.
Yeah, because America and China are working on also things like CRISPR-Cas, so the scissors that can cut in DNA, right? And
that's true.
Yeah. And I know that Europe is working on the ethical part because we are not allowed to work on those technologies.
Yeah.
And why is it dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous if you start doing like a hardcore edits like to the germline, right? If you start making permanent changes in organisms. There's the clear example that comes to mind is Oxitec's mosquito release project. They released some in Brazil a few years ago. They had a project in Florida.
I've heard about that one, yeah.
It didn't work, if I remember correctly. I haven't read the articles in a while, but there were issues. Like it didn't work the way they wanted to. And I think what is the scary bit is we actually don't fully understand how it works, how the technologies work, where all the edits are. But also, it's really hard to like keep your genes in an organism if you're trying to put them in there from like a foreign source. Like you kind of constantly have to select for the genes. And that actually is quite a challenge. And a lot of molecular biologists and microbiologists, they just, like there's memes of like, why are my colonies not transformed? Just like PhDs have this problem all the time. It's actually really, really challenging. So to me, actually, a lot of the fears come from the speculation is how it's going to be applied in the real world in the marketplace. And it's not really tied to the research. And there's this huge actual cognitive barrier between understanding the science and what's actually possible now. How we decide as a culture and a society to use those tools is the scary bit for me.
The two founders of CRISPR-Cas, this technology, recently won the Nobel Prize. Mm-hmm. How do you think that will, what that means for this technology? Because a lot of people are afraid of it. but it can also give us a lot of opportunities to grow foods in places where we can't grow it now, for example, but also to extinct certain diseases, or maybe to create beautiful materials.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that kind of comes to mind is like, and I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable really, but like the whole thing with the Luddites and the Industrial Revolution. Because like at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, you know, everything started changing very quickly for a lot of people. Labor practices changed, manufacturing changed. You know, I've been seeing articles coming out more that, you know, if the 20th century was the Industrial Revolution, the 21st is going to be the ecological revolution. And so, you know, kind of having a technology like CRISPR kind of put at the forefront of that and was like, hey, here's the dawn of the ecological revolution. Here's this major tool that allows us to make edits across kingdoms, like evolutionarily speaking. That to me is kind of like cool, it started. We're here.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the US, of course, and that's also where the term biohacking was being coined, as well as the concept of do-it-yourself biology. Actually was coined already in 1988, I found out. And back in 2005, Wired, the magazine and website, produced an article called "The Era of Garage Biology is Upon Us. Want to Participate?" And in the same year, I know the first, let's say, Garage Lab opened, and 5 years later also BioCurious opened, where you have been working as a volunteer. You're really actively involved in these communities. What can we learn here in the Netherlands, or especially, for example, BlueCity Lab here in the Netherlands, and vice versa, about the values of having those garage community labs?
I started as, in high school I was a nerd, but once I left school, I went directly into the arts. I was a painter. From painting, I became a stage designer for festivals like Burning Man. From there, I went to teaching after-school robotics and engineering classes to kids using Legos. Super fun. Then was a teacher at some other schools. And then I actually, through this practice called permaculture, it's an alternative form of agriculture, I found out about this practice called phytoremediation, which is essentially using plants and living systems to clean up the environment. And then through that, I started getting into wanting to understand more about how to make it more efficient, right? Because plants are like low tens, maybe 7%, like single-digit number efficiency rates. Whereas if you make a GMO, you can get up to like 50 to 60% efficiency rate, which is getting more towards an industrial scale. So it's applicable as a technology. And so my interests kind of naturally carried me from artistic, how do we do the best for the world, to the technical, how do we execute? And in the Bay Area, what really enabled that is, it's such a diverse community. For instance, there are places like BioCurious. There's also counterculture labs, many labs, and Berkeley Biolabs that were all doing similar things, just either...
GenSpace in New York.
GenSpace in New York, exactly. I was just talking the California local ones. I think the big thing is one, you can just walk in, like because of the biohacker community, because of this ecosystem that unfortunately was influenced by move fast and break things. There's just like this open collaborative spirit, right? Where the traditional ideology of the scientist who is academically credentialed, wearing the lab coat, is the only one that has access to the key card to go into the lab. That's totally been challenged. I think in the States, we're fortunate, but also, now realizing how unfortunate it is. But we don't really have culture, right? And so we didn't have anything pushing back against this sort of stuff, because our culture was just go to the new frontier and pioneer or gold rush or whatever the next like high value market potential thing is. Just go do it now. That's the culture. And
opportunities, right? Yeah,
exactly. And so. Everybody's in this atmosphere or a state of mind to kind of foster that and enable cross-pollination. Like me being a scientist or an artist and a teacher, being like, hey, I I literally walked up to PhDs at BioCurious, and I was like, hey, I don't know anything about this. I want to make transgenic phytoremediative plants. What do I need to learn? And they're like, cool, read this stuff. Get back to us. Give us an actual question. I was like, cool, I read this stuff. Here are my questions. And they're like, cool, when can you come in? And I was like, cool, I can give you 3 days a week. They're like, cool, you're going to do all of our grunt work.
I think this is also a tip for our listeners who want to get involved in communities like this. Read, do, communicate, don't be afraid, right?
Yeah.
Totally.
Of course, the lens of opportunities, it triggers and it sounds, okay, everything is possible, but we're talking about genetic modification here. So the ethical part is like really important. We are not God, so we can't endlessly modify nature around us. So I'm really now looking for you saying, okay, but what's the downside of that story, of the opportunities?
Yeah. I mean, my honest answer is, I mean, society still kind of operates under the principles of manifest destiny. Like, we just don't really like to talk about it. So, like, we pretend to be God with everything else, but when it applies to genetics, we change the story a little bit. Because, I mean, we still clear cut, we still monocrop, we still, anywhere humans live, we pave and kill the ground, right? Any square inch of soil has 40,000 different species of bacteria living in it if it's healthy. Like, we commit genocides on a daily basis. It's just to other organisms, you know? So, like, that whole we're not God argument to me is like, it's kind of sad because we presume we are in every other activity we operate under, like whether it's oil, our free markets, now the way we're treating humans, right? Like, we operate as if we own everything, or the people with money own everything. In America, there's this like level of desperation, right, where we haven't been able to really think about those sorts of those problems because there's not really the climate or the space to fully have those conversations.
I will stop being political after this one because it has brought the States a lot, you know, like the pioneering and let's go and let's do this. But now you see the big turnaround, like the States, we in Europe, it's not our example country anymore. We are really scared actually of what's happening over there. It's the failure of democracy. It's the land of opportunities where so many people are poor. There's no healthcare. It's scary what's happening. We're actually seeing the downside of what can happen if there are no restrictions.
Yeah, I think with also like the current climate in the States, like we need to be really careful. Because what is, I think, also the mega downfall and what's created the social collapse that we're seeing now is because of the corruption of our ability to communicate with each other. You know,
the corruption of power as well.
The corruption of power. Well, the corruption, the ability to communicate, like the echo chambers of the entire world and mainly America, have been co-opted by for-profit interests. So you can literally. Like, I mean, I used to do marketing for my startup, right? I could literally target whoever I wanted, and I could, you know, tweak different dials and be like, okay, how can I get you this closer to buying my product? And how can I, you know, like that was what I did when I had this STD company, is like to prove market fit. We just essentially did marketing campaigns to be like, who's going to be able to do this? What's the right price point? We test all of it through marketing. And what I learned through that is really that, like, with these tools, you have the ability to just pinpoint who you want and learn to throttle them to the point of what you want, right? And so when it applies to biotechnology, like, it's in the same culture, but it's also, I think we need to be really careful that I don't think America, what it's going through is because of the spirit of innovation. I think it's because there was nobody who was loud enough and aware of the problem at the time to be, hey, we need to make sure that we're protecting larger aspects of our society.
Do you believe your work brings change, positive change?
I hope so, honestly. I mean, I want to, develop products for nature, but also like for humanity in a way that like allows us to kind of have more of a collaboration. But at this point, I mean, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm very much still, like, in terms of the design work I do, like, kind of exploring that. Like, I really am passionate about taking like what are the hardcore technical things and translating it into ways that non-science literate people can understand, because that to me is that's one of the big frontiers that we need to kind of work through, I feel like, in these times, especially with Corona and climate change and all of these science-heavy problems. We need people who can effectively communicate things to the lay public.
Well, they can't help it, you know.
Exactly, and I think that's the scariest part of like these times is like, and one of the big like political challenges as well is like, how do you effectively communicate these problems in a way that like the normal person will make action and feel the need, right? Because it's so abstract. You're talking about aerosols floating through the air. You see these weird simulations of dots landing on surfaces, and you're like,
what challenge do you see here in Rotterdam that you would love to tackle with rolled-up sleeves like you have now?
I mean, directly, I'm not quite sure what my role will be in that regard yet. I mean, I have a lot of, experience from what helped create the Bay, I was lucky enough to be in the Bay at the right place at the right time to know what all the things are necessary to kind of make things come together for that. But since the podcast series, I've been talking to various people in the startup bio design kind of oriented spheres. And there's a loose discussion about starting to develop like tools for biodesigners, because, we have this, if we're coming from a technical background, we have this privilege of having technical knowledge, but also as a biodesigner, if you don't, I remember such a huge intimidation thing to overcome when I first got into science, because I was like, I am pouring magical science goo into a petri dish. What is happening? This is really intimidating. And so that's a real emotional barrier that needs to be, I think, overcome for people coming in to something that touches the sciences. So one, I think there needs to be an understanding and a willingness on people who are coming into it that there's going to be an emotional barrier that's probably going to need to be crossed. But also we can come in from the technical side and kind of help provide tools, lessons, protocols to help kind of create a social, emotional, and learning environment that just fosters play and fun, right? Because at the end of the day, nothing innovative happens if you're stressed out. Yeah. So if you get as many people who are part of the conversation, you get scientists, lawmakers, policymakers, engineers, artists, designers, poets, fashion designers, everybody. Invite every single aspect of like the individual aspect of human cognition that has kind of found some place in the world.
Nico, if you can pick one favorite between brackets bio or designer, architect, scientist, you name it, to collaborate with, who would that be?
I think my dream project would be a combination, or working with a team of Patrick Schumacher, Neri Oxman, and Michael Levin of the Levin Lab at Tufts University. One of my big dreams, if I could ever accomplish it, is make something that is akin to Home Tree, or like a metabolizing piece of architecture that's fully alive. So Patrick Schumacher is like the parametricism dude. Neri Oxman is architecture with design and starting to incorporate metabolic elements. And then Levin is he's researching the molecular control switches for morphology or the architecture of organisms. And I think if you got all those people into a room, it would be so cool. Like imagine living, breathing architecture. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Nico.
Yeah, thank you.
And we wish you all the luck.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
This Growcast was hosted by Barbara Vos and Emma van der Leest and produced by BlueCity Lab. This podcast was realized with funding from the Municipality of Rotterdam and Creative Industries Fund NL, and was edited by Puree Productions. We also want to give a shout out to Nienke Binnendijk, director of BlueCity Lab, and Sabine Biesheuvel, director of BlueCity, and actually everyone else from the BlueCity team for their trust and never-ending support. Until next time, thank you for listening.